It all began with a request that, at first glance, seemed simple but was undeniably unusual. The White House staff had received countless letters daily, yet one quickly stood out among the rest. This letter wasn't from a high-ranking official, a seasoned politician, or a decorated military general. It was from a young Navy captain named Emma Caldwell. At just 28 years old, she was one of the youngest captains ever in the history of the U.S. Navy. Captains of her age were almost unheard of, a rarity in the military world. And for someone of her rank to request a personal meeting with the President of the United States, that was even more unheard of. The letter itself was brief, but it carried weight. "Mr. President, I have something important to discuss, not for my sake, but for those who serve in silence." When the letter reached President Donald Trump's desk, he glanced at it with mild curiosity. As a leader who had spent years in discussions with generals, admirals, and top military strategists, he was no stranger to topics like sacrifice, leadership, and the responsibilities of the armed forces. But this felt different. Leaning back in his chair, he reread the letter, his interest growing. A young Navy captain, with the audacity to directly request a meeting. What could be so urgent that she felt the need to take such a bold step? "Who is this Captain Caldwell?" Trump asked, raising an eyebrow at his aides. One of his advisors quickly pulled up her file. "Emma Caldwell, sir. She's 28, graduated at the top of her class from the Naval Academy, and was commissioned as an officer at 22. She took command at 26, making her one of the youngest in modern history." Trump nodded thoughtfully, his intrigue piqued. "And what's her record?" "Impressive, sir. Several successful operations, numerous commendations for leadership. But there's some controversy. 3 years ago, she made a decision during a mission that led to casualties." Trump's eyes narrowed. He had met many military leaders over the years, but it was rare for someone so young to request a meeting at this level, rarer still for someone with no political ambitions to take such a direct approach. "Let's hear what she has to say," he finally decided. Within hours, arrangements were swiftly made for the meeting. As word spread that a 28-year-old Navy captain had been granted a meeting with the president, the country buzzed with speculation. The internet exploded with theories, and news outlets couldn't get enough. But Emma? She paid it no mind. She'd faced doubt her entire life. From the moment she enlisted in the Navy at 18, people had underestimated her. When she became an officer at 22, some questioned whether she had what it took. When she took command at 26, others murmured that she was too young, too inexperienced. But Emma had proven them all wrong, time and time again. Now, she wasn't speaking for herself. She was speaking for those who had sacrificed more than she ever could. This wasn't about recognition or politics, it was about truth. The military jet carrying Emma touched down at Joint Base Andrews under a gray morning sky. As she stepped off, she could feel the weight of unseen eyes on her. The press hadn't been officially notified about her visit, but that didn't stop reporters from speculating. A few journalists had caught wind of her arrival, and the questions started flying even before she set foot on White House grounds. Emma said nothing. She kept her expression neutral, her composure steady. This wasn't new to her. She had been trained to stay calm under pressure, to hold her ground when all eyes were on her. But inside, her heart was pounding. This wasn't just another briefing. This wasn't a routine military report. This was her moment. As she walked towards the White House gates, her mind flashed back to the countless sacrifices she had witnessed throughout her career. She wasn't here for a photo op. She wasn't here to impress anyone. She was here because someone had to speak up. When Emma entered the Oval Office, she immediately felt the weight of history. The room was grand yet intimate, filled with portraits of past leaders, some she admired, others she studied in her military history courses. The scent of polished wood lingered in the air, a subtle reminder that this was the place where decisions of great consequence were made. President Trump stood near his desk, hands in his pockets, watching her with a mix of curiosity and respect. "Captain Caldwell," he greeted her, his voice steady. "I've met generals, admirals, and world leaders, but a 28-year-old Navy captain sitting across from me? Now that's something you don't see every day." Emma met his gaze and stood at attention. "Mr. President, "Thank you for meeting with me," she said, her voice calm and measured. Trump gestured toward the chair in front of him. "Your letter caught my attention. You said this wasn't for you, but for those who serve in silence. Tell me more about what that means." Emma sat down, gathering her thoughts. This was the moment she had prepared for, the one chance she had to speak her truth. She wasn't going to waste it. Trump leaned back in his chair, his sharp gaze fixed on her. He tapped his fingers thoughtfully on the desk, repeating her words. "You said this wasn't for you, but for those who serve in silence. Tell me, what does that mean?" Emma didn't hesitate. She was ready. Emma had rehearsed this moment in her mind countless times. 1,000, maybe more. But now that she was finally here, in the Oval Office, with the weight of the world seemingly pressing down on her, she knew she couldn't hide behind careful wording or diplomatic phrasing. No, this time, she was going to speak the truth, the kind of truth that people usually shy away from, the one that no one wants to hear. It means that behind every medal, behind every mission, there's a cost, one that no one ever sees, she began, her voice unwavering. And sometimes leadership, it's not about the victories, the promotions, or the glory. Sometimes, it's about surviving the failures. Trump leaned in slightly, narrowing his eyes in curiosity. "Go on," he said, his tone signaling he was ready for more. Emma drew in a steadying breath. This was it. This was why she had come here. Her voice remained calm, but the weight of her words carried an unmistakable urgency. "Mr. President, this country loves to talk about leadership. It loves to celebrate the wins, the promotions, the honors, the glory," she continued. "But nobody talks about the weight that comes with it. Nobody talks about the nights we lie awake, replaying the decisions that cost lives." Trump's expression shifted, hardening, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. He had met countless military leaders in his time, seasoned commanders, decorated war heroes. But Emma was different. She wasn't here reciting protocol or discussing military policies. She wasn't giving a rehearsed speech. No, she was speaking from a place of raw, unfiltered experience. She had lived it. "You're talking about sacrifice," Trump said, almost more as a statement than a question. Emma nodded slowly, her voice carrying a weight of its own. "Not just any sacrifice, the kind that stays with you, the kind that haunts you." Trump took a deep breath, exhaling slowly as he leaned forward, his elbows now resting on the desk. "Tell me," he said, his voice quieter now, "what's the hardest sacrifice you've made?" Emma clenched her fists in her lap, feeling the tension rising. She had prepared for this question, but that didn't make answering it any easier. 3 years ago, I made a call in the field, she began, her voice firm yet laced with emotion. It was supposed to be a routine mission. Nothing out of the ordinary. But something went wrong. A small miscalculation. An unexpected variable, whatever you want to call it. Her voice faltered for just a second, but she quickly regained her composure. "My best friend, Lieutenant Jake Carter, trusted my decision, and he died because of it." The room fell into a heavy silence. Trump's gaze remained fixed on her, his expression unreadable. He had seen loss before, had shaken the hands of grieving families, had witnessed the sacrifices made by brave men and women who laid down their lives for their country. But something about Emma's words, something about the rawness in her voice, cut through the usual formalities of the situation. "And you still carry it?" Trump asked quietly, his voice softer now, almost as if he understood. Emma swallowed hard, her throat tightening. "Every day," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because leadership isn't about making the right choices all the time. It's about carrying the weight of the wrong ones." Trump sat back in his chair, his fingers running over his chin thoughtfully. "I understand that," he said after a long pause. Emma wasn't sure if he truly did understand. How could he? He had never been on the front lines. He had never had to face the reality of commanding troops in combat, never had to look a fellow soldier's family in the eye and tell them that their loved one wouldn't be coming home. But then, to her surprise, Trump leaned forward again. His expression was uncharacteristically serious. "You know," he began, his voice low, "when you're president, Every decision affects millions of people. People love you, people hate you. You try to do the right thing, but no matter what, someone pays the price. Sometimes, you never even know if you made the right call. Emma hadn't expected this level of honesty from him. Then why do it? She asked, genuinely curious. Trump gave a faint, knowing smile, his eyes meeting hers. Same reason you do, Captain, he said. Because if you don't, someone else will. And you'd rather be the one carrying that weight, wouldn't you? You wouldn't want to let someone else bear it. Emma exhaled slowly, her heart racing. Maybe, just maybe, he did understand. And that made this conversation even more significant. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of the conversation hung between them, heavy but necessary. Finally, Emma spoke again, her voice quieter now, softer than before. I remember the last thing Jake said to me before our mission, she said, her eyes distant as if recalling the memory. He smiled and said, if this goes south, don't you dare carry me like a ghost. She let out a bitter chuckle, shaking her head. But that's exactly what I've done. Trump sat in silence for a moment, considering her words carefully. Finally, he spoke, his tone reflective. You were his leader, he said, his voice steady. That's a burden you'll always feel. He paused before adding, but tell me, what would he say if he saw you here right now? Emma blinked, surprised by the question. It was one she had never really thought about before. After a brief pause, she smiled faintly, shaking her head. He'd probably roll his eyes and say, why are you wasting time talking to the president when you could be out there making a real difference? Trump chuckled softly, a rare moment of lightness in the heavy conversation. Emma couldn't help but smile. Maybe Jake was right. Maybe she was where she needed to be.